It is dawn in Downing Street. In fact, some time before dawn, 5:45, and the Prime Minister is at his kitchen table in the flat with his government boxes, just as he is every morning.
Morning, Prime Minister. Sorry to
morning.
interrupt
Morning.
your morning.
No, this is normally my
I'm
only
tempted to say,
time of peace and quiet, actually, all day.
Yeah.
Well, have a seat.
Yeah.
The day is full of meetings and telephone calls and things like cabinet meetings, National Security Council and whatever. So in the morning, between sort of 5:45 and 7:45, I find 2 hours where I can get the signing done, I can brief myself for the day, I can read the things that need to be read.
And it's every day, even on
Every
holiday.
day. I find that this stuff builds up if you have a day when you don't do it. So I find Saturday and Sunday, it might not be 5:45, but it's pretty early. I like living above the shop because I get to see my children. You can see this is a work table, but in a minute it's going to be a breakfast table.
Colgate, hairbrush, anyway.
The usual rituals have to be gone through.
A couple of hours later, the children, Nancy is 11, her brother Elwyn 9 and Florence 4, come charging into the kitchen. So Mr. Cameron has to switch from matters of state to the business of the school run.
Don't fiddle with it or it'll all fall out.
For security reasons, we have agreed not to identify the children here.
How is book day going, Nance?
Book day's going awesome. We've got...
I heard that sewing machine whizzing.
That was my night. That was in
you?
the morning. I woke up at 6.
Right, well, and that was that noise. I thought it was Mummy doing something, but that was you.
That was me.
Nancy has been saying all this stuff, so this is like book day.
Right.
What are you going as?
Robin Hood.
Robin Hood.
Yes.
Have we got a bow? An
Yes, I have a bow and I have an arrow.
And a quiver?
Yeah.
Sword?
No, that's the only problem. I don't have a quiver.
Don't you have a quiver?
We've got a sword.
I thought you did
No,
have
I
one.
did have a quiver, but then, as you expect.
Can you take a sword to school? Is that all right?
Yes, it is a wooden sword.
Right, okay.
And it's for an outfit.
Right, well, that's cool.
It is a normal enough scene, except that there's nothing normal about living in a world where you have to call for an armoured car if you happen to run out of milk. In fact, there's an awful lot about this life we simply wouldn't recognise. So how do you stay sane?
This doesn't seem like a funny question. Does him being the Prime Minister mean anything to the kids?
They're really lucky. They go to a really nice school. It's a really down-to-earth, normal school. It's a very small school. And all the parents and teachers there, I think, have made a huge effort not to make any kind of fuss around anything. So 90% of our day-to-day life remains very much unchanged from what it was before. But so, issues come up recently. Florence, obviously, I still doesn't really understand. She's been born and brought up here. She's only little. She's just started school. And she came home from school one day saying, my daddy's the Prime Minister. And the other children kind of pounced on her. They were sort of like, you can't say that. It's really uncool. People think you're bragging. And she's like, what's bragging? Her vocabulary isn't really good enough to understand. They're like, like boasting, Florence, boasting. She's like, what do you mean, kind of boasting? So anyway, they managed to, get it into that she couldn't, say, go around saying that at school. And then my mum came, I was away for work actually, they rang me because they were sort of hysterical laughter because my mum came round to have tea with them. And Florence had gone up to her and said, don't tell anyone, but my daddy's the Prime Minister. Which of course the others thought was hilarious. So you do, obviously there are kind of issues, but in the main I think they've managed to be incredibly, they cope with it really well.
As a couple, it seems to me that you've had this kind of really forensic, determined focus on trying to keep things normal. And I get the impression that you particularly have sort of slightly drilled it into him with a all the time.
Yeah.
Don't let it go to your head, it'll end ugly,
probably. The children do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, they do, yeah,
They
I saw
don't
that.
get away
Yeah,
with
I saw
anything.
that,
They take the mick
I
all
saw
day
that.
long. No, obviously when we moved here, it was incredibly daunting. I was terrified of the impact it was going to have on the children, on us as a family, on our marriage. But it's been much easier than I expected it to be. Say I go to the same office, the children go to the same school. There's a lot of our life that hasn't changed, and we have a lot of focus on just being on our own, keeping up with our old friends. We've got big families. I'm one of 8 siblings, he's one of 4. And I think that keeps you grounded. You've got to try and not let your life change in any way.
You may have noticed there has been a fair degree of coverage on the politics of filming at the kitchen table. But this is the first clue to David Cameron. No one who knows him doubts this is where his heart lies.
And
Daddy?
yes.
We don't know what the teachers are going to be.
I'm not sure they do. I think the point is, do they join
Do you
in?
not know?
Yes.
Do you not know what you're?
Do
they
they?
all dress up. They all dress up.
Teachers will
Yeah.
do like a surprise thing.
Yeah, and they're going to dress up too.
Right. So have you got fairy wings? Have you,
Surprise for
What did
us.
they dress up as last year?
have you got enough things?
Usually they just
Bean,
dress
why are
up
you not going as
as
Elsa? That's what I want to know.
Because it's not a book.
Too.
I know, but it's not a book. It's not a book. Anyway, you got some interesting views on school food.
It's absolutely
I'm not
disgusting. I bought in a chip that was half green. I made sure I bought that
She
home.
pursued me around the kitchen with it. So look at this chip.
All I will say is your dad can fix things like this, and don't let him tell you that he can't. If the chips aren't
Well, I've been
understanding,
saying
you can.
So he goes from fixing school lunches to fixing intervention in Libya. A touch complicated, to say the least. How do you shift from matters of family to matters of state and back again? How do you make sure you're sufficiently on it?
One of the things I was wondering actually was at 6 in the morning when you're working through an awful lot of information, do you find you miss stuff and you have to go back and read it again?
Yes, you can find, if you're not careful, you're reading something and you're not... You've got to focus, because at the end of the day, at the top of almost every memo is enough space for me to write my comments. So although I'm fully digitised, BlackBerry, iPhone, everything else, actually for this part of work, the office finds it helpful if I write on a piece of paper, having read the submission. So then everybody knows what the decision is.
Yeah.
So, and also this is very secure. Because there's only one version of this.
But do you sometimes find 2 weeks after you had something in your red box, or 6 months afterwards, something goes wrong and you think, damn, I should have been concentrating more that morning?
I
it's
think.
slipped
I mean,
through.
sometimes you get things wrong. I have, in here somewhere, are probably 10 decisions I've got to make this morning, and you hope you'll get as many right as possible. You're never going to get them all right, but the key thing, the system needs you, and the government needs you, and the country needs you to make decisions. Otherwise, nothing happens.
If his heart does lie inside this flat and not downstairs in the office, the key question is whether that is a political strength or a weakness. Chillax Dave. How some in his party hate him for that. Andrew Feldman is one of his oldest friends and a very long-standing tennis partner.
I have to ask you, first of all, is he any good at tennis?
Yes, annoyingly, he is.
Is he?
Yeah, well, he's just very consistent.
Right.
He doesn't make many mistakes.
Is that like his politics, really, that he's sort of quite even in his...
Even and thoughtful and consistent and fitter than me. I've
Important-
never beaten him. I've never taken a set off him in 25 years, I'm ashamed to admit.
Is that why he still likes playing with you?
Probably.
Is he better than Nick Clegg?
He likes to think so.
What does Nick Clegg like to think, and what's your
I think-
objective middle opinion about
I
their various
suspect
skills?
that Nick Clegg is technically a better player,
Right.
but makes more mistakes than David Cameron.
But revealing as the tennis stories may or may not be, it's not a love of one of the nation's summer games that is the key to David Cameron's equilibrium. According to Andrew Feldman, and for that matter the Prime Minister's great friend the Chancellor, it is much, much more personal than that. Both witnessed his reaction to the death of his oldest son Ivan just before the last election.
He said to me once that the loss of Ivan was so shocking and so traumatic that he already had quite a lot of perspective, but that, for him, made him feel like, well, nothing can ever be that bad. Nothing can ever hurt that much. And I think that enables him to always detach himself, however bad or how troubling a situation is. I think in the back of his mind, he thinks nothing ever will feel that bad.
I'm a parent myself. It's unimaginable, the grief that he went through and Samantha went through. And that funeral was one of the saddest things I've ever been to.
It is not the easiest subject to raise, but if nothing else, David Cameron is emotionally an open book.
Look, it's everyone's dread to lose a child, that that you outlive your children and you lose someone you love so much so young. That it does hit you like nothing else. And there is a bit of you that think, well, if you can face that sort of challenge in your life, then everything else puts everything else into perspective.
When you're living through something so deeply personally traumatic, how do you keep your game face on?
Well, look, when it happened, we did have to sort of take some time out. Maybe we should have taken some more time out on reflection, but...
Why do you say that? Because you deal with it?
I think, well, it was just a really difficult time, and it takes a very long time before you get over it. And you never truly get over it, but what happens is that slowly you start remembering all the positive things, and you start thinking about those things rather than just the gloom and the doom and the missing and the pain.
So what kind of impact has this had? What kind of leader does it make him? A notably even-tempered one, insist his friends.
I think he feels that in order to make the best decisions and make the best judgments, he's better off remaining level-headed. So, funnily enough, the more serious a situation gets, or the more important the decision, I always find him to be almost invariably the calmest person in the room.
David Cameron doesn't seem to carry much ideological baggage, but is that a strength or a weakness? Phil Collins used to write speeches for Tony Blair and is now a highly respected columnist for The Times.
Some people have called David Cameron dangerously fair-minded. I don't think there's anything dangerous about being fair-minded. But he doesn't come with preconceived ideas. He's not particularly ideological. So to that extent, people might think he's fair-minded, in that he doesn't have a prior view. He'll turn up and work out, according to his instincts, where he thinks we should go. So that can be a great advantage in politics, because it makes you very supple. It means you don't have very rigid positions. But it's also ultimately a weakness, because we don't really know who he is.
I think some prime ministers are consumed by the job. They're almost eaten up by the job after a while. And other prime ministers always stay on top of the job. They are in charge of the job rather than the other way around. He definitely falls into that category.
Isn't that part of his problem, though, particularly with some of his backbench MPs? Because I get the impression that one of the things that really winds them up is that he doesn't seem to care enough in their eyes. He's too chillaxed or relaxed, or however you want to put it.
Well, it is true that sometimes he's been criticised because he can relax, or does have a holiday, or does spend time with his family. But actually, that is an immense strength in a person who then has to make the big decisions on behalf of the whole country, including decisions about life and death, war and peace.
If that's David Cameron, the leader, what about David Cameron, the head of the Tory party? The focus group research conducted by pollsters and academics is not very positive. Somehow a visit to an alligator and crocodile park seemed like a good moment to raise the subject.
We've met some reptiles in our life, but this is the real thing.
Somehow this seems an appropriate moment to raise this as I'm sitting here looking at the alligators.
Contemplating
alligators. Well, the focus group research is kind of interesting. Cartoon character, you're Dick Dastardly, apparently. I mean, there are worse ones. I don't know what you
I used to watch that when I was little.
Really? Did you imagine that you'd one day be Dick Dastardly?
No, I wanted to be the looking one with a beautiful girl, but anyway, it didn't work out that way.
Yeah, no, okay. Sometimes life doesn't. Holiday destination Monaco. I'm sure you've read about that press, and also
never been actually.
Never been.
So
no,
okay.
I suppose the serious point is, drink your still champagne. Do you think you should have abandoned the modernisation project, the image project, quite so quickly? Because
look, I wouldn't accept that I've abandoned the modernisation of the Conservative Party. I think every day political parties need to modernise. I think the Conservative Party has moved a huge way under my leadership. But I've never tried to hide who I am. Look, I have, I went to a very posh school. I had a very privileged upbringing with parents who were incredibly loving and brilliant, but and I've never tried to hide that. I don't change my accent or talk in a different way.
No, I understand that, but your biggest political problem, it seems to be, the economy's recovering, and you can all agree on that, but your single biggest political problem is that you're seen by too many people to be a member of an elite concerned with looking after other members of the elite. That's your political problem.
I accept we need to do more to demonstrate that the economy we're delivering, the jobs, the tax reductions, the homes we're building, the schools that are getting better, that is for people who work hard, who do the right thing. That is not
for some sort of them and us economy. It is for hard-working people, and that's what I've been doing for the last 4.5 years. But I accept, you know, in politics, perceptions matter as well as reality, and we've got to work harder to get that right.
David Cameron has one big strength as a leader, but one really big weakness. And his strength is that he looks like a prime minister. His weakness is a political one, which is that he looks and sounds like a Conservative, and the Conservative Party is still unpopular. And in order to stretch the Conservative Party and reach into places it's currently not winning in the West Midlands and in the northwest of England, you really would ideally be someone who doesn't look and sound like the Conservative Party. Margaret Thatcher could do that. She could pull over people who weren't natural Tories. Tony Blair could pull people to Labour who weren't natural Labour supporters. David Cameron really struggles to do that. So it's hard for him to win in places the Conservatives would need to win in order to win an overall majority.
You may have heard that the Conservatives have a long-term economic plan. At least you will have done, unless you happen to have just returned from Mars. So maybe it is all about the economy. A visit to BAE Systems near Preston, the arms manufacturer, to talk about apprentices, is designed to reinforce the message.
We're getting the country back to work, we're succeeding in the world, we're growing.
The economy is recovering, sure, but I ask him on the train back south whether it is doing most of us any good.
We're travelling south now.
Yes.
You just think of all the people in these towns don't have very big incomes who just aren't feeling anything.
I think that's right, and that's why, you know, if you look at what we're saying about turning this economic success into a success for you and security for you and your family, it's very down to earth. It's saying more jobs, trying to cut your taxes so you keep more of your own money to spend as you choose, building homes that you can afford to buy and your children can buy, starter homes, good school places for your children, dignity in retirement. You know, this is not utopia. This is what people should expect in Britain from a competent, strong government doing the right thing.
But you're the same age as me. When we were in our 20s, we were leaving university, we had no or little debt. You could get a house for a reasonable sum of money. How are the children of the next generation ever going to have that kind of start? That's what people worry about.
Yes, students do have debts because we want a well-funded university system, but still, leaving school in Britain today, if you work hard and make the right choices, you can build a really good future for yourself. But we need to make that clearer. We need to do more.
But also, I suppose I'm making a broader point, which is that to some extent, London is flush with foreign money. That's begun to spill out into other cities too. How does it necessarily improve people's lives?
Look, I don't think we pull the country up by pulling London down. London is different. It's a sort of global city. But in the rest of the country, we've got to make it easier to get that job, get that apprenticeship. We've got to build homes that people can afford to buy. We can do these things. And I think people are beginning to see that the plan is paying off because the jobs are coming through, the apprenticeships are there, and, you know, university leavers can look forward to a good career.
He has famously in recent weeks said he only wants 5 more years. He may or may not get that. His family and friends insist, though, that he's remained saner than most in the job and will manage life beyond it.
What do you really love about the job, and what could you live without?
You could live without obviously the sort of security. The fact you get up on a Saturday morning and you can't just jump in the car and go down to the shop and get a pint of milk and a newspaper. I certainly won't
Well, you'll
miss
have that forever.
Well, I don't know, but whatever.
Yeah.
But what I like about it is I really feel there's a team there, there's a vision, there's a thing we're doing for the country, there's a important work we're doing, and of course there are good days and bad days, and days that you can feel all the things getting on top of you. But basically, I've been sustained by the fact that I really believe in what I'm doing.
Yeah. And if one day you won't be doing it, are you okay about that in your head? Whenever that is?
Yeah, no, of course, no. All prime ministers go mad eventually, don't they?
I didn't want to tell you, but now you come to mention it. Yeah.
But I feel 4 3/4 years in, I feel I'm doing a good job. I've got a strong team. I know what I need to achieve. I know where the country's going. I really want to finish the work. But I totally recognise there is a time when, you would have given your best, and it's time for fresh blood and new people and all the rest of it. And, hopefully you stay sane for long enough to realise when that is.